Hey everyone, hope that everybody is doing well and had a relaxing holiday weekend. Um, Relaxing seems especially important to do in what has been a couple of challenging years, to say the least, 3 years really, almost, when it comes to the pandemic. So I hope everybody's staying strong and that you are taking a little bit of time for yourselves this summer, enjoying the nice weather, and at the same time, at least from what I can tell, also enjoying and getting into sort of getting into the grit of the conversations and the ideas that are going around. For me, the first module was something really that I thought was impressive. As you know now, the readings that we're going to be taking on in this class are quite dense and in many ways challenging and difficult. Um, Not to mention that we're reading multiple excerpts from multiple texts and sort of constellating them to sort of create interesting hopefully interesting and productive juxtapositions of ideas and material that will hopefully sort of shake loose differential thinking and different ideas. For the first module, of course, this is primarily focused around just the concept of technology, what it is, what it can be, how we normally think of technology. Usually in this day and age, with our sort of high technology era or digital technology era, we think of technology as being something, as many of our readings said, we think of technology as being something like, computers or cell phones, as opposed to something as simple as a coat hanger, or even language. Obviously, language being a sort of primary technology. What I'm here to do is sort of welcome you into module two. Module two is called gesturance. And you can see there's a combination between the words gesture and utterance. And that gives us a little bit, a very initial sense of how the module is going to focus in on in terms of our readings. These ideas of, again, a technology that's kind of overlooked or not appreciated enough, which is body gesture, nonverbal communications, utterances, oral culture. So all those things that are so sort of, the kind of bits and pieces of communication, everyday communication, that we tend to ignore, though we utilize greatly in terms of communicating with one another, and that also are essential to understanding a lot of contemporary things, phenomena in terms of communication and art forms and things like that. Everything from, as you'll see in the readings, from contemporary hip hop to things like ASMR. So how the aspects of communications that are nonverbal, that are gestures, that are gesticulations, that are utterances, can very much be seen as a crucial part of the ways in which we communicate, and a very important sort of writing technology, if you will. Um, the other thing that is happening, a couple things to sort of keep in mind, I should say, in terms of as we go into the second week, is the seminar project. Again, like I said in the last video, it is an individual project, and you should have decided what you want to do for your seminar project. I would say, ASAP, but most definitely by the end of this week. Take a look at the seminar project description. Again, try and do something that catches your interest, and don't overwhelm yourself. Communicate with me. We only have, some 5 weeks left, so don't, go too big. Do something that's going to be productive, something that captures your interest, and energizes you. And so, like I said, communicate with me, and I'm probably going to be putting together a discussion board just so we can brainstorm ideas, and sort of motivate us to sort of get something down paper, if you will, by the end of this week. Beyond that, this module, we have the usual discussion starters. This time, Zakaya and Binal. Again, I apologize if I'm mispronouncing those names. I've reached out to people to make sure that I'm pronouncing their names correctly. I'm sure I'm not, and so I look forward to being corrected on that. But the other thing that's new this module is we have our first case studies. The case studies, again, like the discussion starters, are something we will be doing once this summer. Each of us will do one case study. And ideally, you want to focus that case study upon something related to your seminar project, but you don't have to. The case study is really just another opportunity for you to bring something from your own life, your own thinking, your own ideas, your own experience, your own interests in relation to something from the class. So it's really kind of an open assignment, hopefully a creative and engaging assignment. And we'll have 3 case studies. There'll be a case study discussion board. We'll have 3 case studies this module from Omar, Michael, and Kaylin. And then those will be posted by the end of Friday night. And then we'll respond to those by the end of Sunday night. So I hope that's really where we're at now. Of course, we have another set of CP points, CP2 points available. Like I said, those are pure extra credit points. You can get as many of those as you would like. If there's something you missed, earlier in the class or in this module, you can make up those points really quite easily with the CP mechanic, if you will, in terms of our class. Lastly, I want to take a few minutes here, and it's probably going to run a little bit longer, but I want to sort of collect some of the really eye-opening ideas that you guys developed. I did some of this in my last video, but I want to do a little bit more here after the discussion starter discussion, and collect some of those ideas and even pull some of the key ideas I think that struck the most chords in the group from our last set of readings, from the technology readings. So for starters, Derek and Karina did a wonderful job with the discussion starters. Derek really focusing in on Sterling's Dead Media project and bringing up this notion, Sterling, as Derek quotes from Sterling, says that the frantic pace of our sort of technological progress, if you will, is entirely our own fault, is Sterling's quote. And Derek sort of proposed this to us and opened this up to us, mentioning that, not to sort of say, not to disregard or put down the kind of progress we have made, but how fast is too fast, Derek asks. Sterling wants us seemingly to pump the brakes a little bit, at least enough for us to truly look around and take it all in, as Derek said. And one of the things that a couple of things that came up that I thought were really interesting here was Molly responded by bringing in a quote from Jason Silva from a talk that he gave at the Tribeca Film Festival, where he says, "Whatever we create creates us back." And essentially, as Molly explained, what this means is that whenever we learn a new technology, we become smarter and build more creative potential for ourselves. And that's a very sort of optimistic viewpoint, as opposed to, say, we hear a lot of technological deterministic viewpoints that are very negative, right? That technology is destroying us, it's making us into robots or whatever, it's taking away our humanity. Furthermore, John responded interestingly enough that the pace is actually not fast enough. What are we going to lose out on if we decide to sort of stop the kind of technological progression and innovation that we see in our society? Then imagine all that we might lose out on by pumping the brakes. So I think that's a really interesting idea. I think I mentioned this notion of accelerationism as a sort of theory, as a way of thinking and framing a particular perspective on our current society. And so I think that kind of plays into that. One of the things that that this brought to mind was like something with like schools, right? I think this is always important to put into context, which is something that Karina mentioned in her discussion starter, that we should always put things into context, right? That so with school, after the pandemic, right, so much of school went online, and that led to a lot of realizations that, wow, and this is the same place in many ways for the workplace, is well, it's so much of the what we do could be done online from home. So should we just, we sort of got plunged into that situation of online schooling, and at a really sort of immediate, fast rate. And was that a good thing? Well, certainly there were some bumps and bruises going through that process. I think we would all agree that online schooling, while very convenient and well necessary at that time during the pandemic in terms of safety, but taught us a lot of things, both teachers and students, learners and instructors, about how much technology, if you will, is too much, how much mediation is too much, and also to what extent should we sort of stick with the traditional ways. Sometimes it's hard to tell those things. Which what I mean by that is, I didn't say that very articulately, but a lot of times change is difficult, right? We've all heard that stereotype where it's like, well, Zoom, since we're so used to being in the classroom, being out of the classroom might have been exciting at first, and then it was really confusing perhaps, and really sort of numbing for some. And so you really long for the classroom, or at least I'll speak for myself. I really, and I still do, I long for the classroom. But is that just me sort of being stuck in my ways? That's the technology I've always had, so to speak, in relation to learning, is the classroom. But maybe it could be otherwise. But for me, I feel like the classroom is still such an important aspect of learning. But I'll mention, in response also to Derek's discussion started, this idea that the speed or the pace is leading to a kind of dehumanization. And I think this actually brings up something really important in terms of this notion of speed, or the pace of things. Maybe it's not so much, I think there's two kinds of speeds, if you will, that we can think about here. The thinking of speed, pace, or velocity, not just in terms of technological development, right? How fast we innovate things, right? How fast we get to the iPhone 15, 16, 17, but also thinking about speed and pace in terms of our own lifestyles and in terms of our own experience. To what extent do we feel overloaded? I just know for myself, even moving to New York City, where I currently reside, the speed of the lifestyle, the pace of the lifestyle is quite different from where I grew up out in California. A lot different, to be honest with you. And yes, this is in part due to technology, but I mean, certainly it is due to technology. As from our reading, you probably remember that Ursula Le Guin mentions that technology, and I'm going to look at the quote here, technology is the active human interface with the material world. It's the way that we interact and commune and communicate with the regular world. And so with the material world, excuse me, or the real world. And so, all the transportation, the buildings and all that stuff, the density of New York City creates a very different kind of lifestyle and living. And it took some adjustment for me to get used to that. Again, using a specific example as a point of context. And so, this idea of, during the turn of the 20th century, in the sort of first industrial revolution, if you will, which was sort of more more late 19th century, but anyways, during the development of big cities, people are really started to talk about these new kinds of conditions, mental conditions, mental health conditions, things like psychasthenia and schizophrenia and things like this. becoming much more prominent. And it really is, I think, in part at least, due to this kind of recalibration of our lives that the technology is creating, right? That it's creating this new kind of rhythm, this new kind of pace. So not only thinking about speed and velocity and pace in terms of how fast we innovate and how fast we develop things, but also develop technologies, but also what that does to our lives and our lifestyles and our mental health and our thinking. And it's not like it's all good or all bad, right? We tend to, like I said, polarize these kind of ideas, these conversations. For me, for one, I don't have social media, and in part that's just because I couldn't handle it. I don't mean to sound like a grandpa or a Luddite, and I have no problem with social media. I think there's some wonderful things that social media does and brings about. But I just, for myself, it's like it's too fast for my gears, for whatever reason. It's just it doesn't. I've never really the pace, the velocity of it, the differential notion of experience and where I get notions of satisfaction and things like that seem to be sort of recalibrated with what social media experience I have, which is very little. Michael also mentions something of this, just to sort of close this up in terms of Derek's wonderful question here, based on in reference to Sterling, that Michael mentioned feeling totally out of control, and that such a pace of our society requires us to remain acutely aware of what we consume and interface with on a daily basis, which I think is exactly right. The crucial thing here is to remember that we are in control, although it may not feel like that. And sometimes we have to sort of discipline ourselves, and because, like as Michael says, remain acutely aware of what we consume and how we consume and how we interface with one another and with our worlds, if you will, on a daily basis, as Michael says. I think that's just a wonderful. In fact, if there was a thesis of what this class could be about, would be this idea of developing that awareness of the ways in which technologies calibrate our, if you will, or determine our consumption, our interfacing with one another and with our societies, with our worlds. Karina, as I mentioned before, I thought did a wonderful job with her discussion starter in terms of talking about the importance of context, and particularly this is in relation to the MIT's Intro to Media Studies excerpt. And yes, it's focused primarily on television, because television was really, I mean, I think it was the mid-90s that reading was from. I can look real quick. I think it was 1998, maybe 1995. Sterling was 1995. I passed right by it. Sorry, 1 second. 1998, yeah, for the Intro to Media Studies. So television was kind of the high technology there, but the thing that Karina pulled out, a couple things that I thought were really powerful, was this idea that the list that Intro to Media Studies provides really sort of gives us a sense of the way that making sure, emphasizing that we remember context, that television is ingrained in our culture, as Karina said, as much as our culture is ingrained in television. And this sort of connects back to that Jason Silva quote that Molly mentioned, that whatever we create creates us back. I feel like those connections are really crucial, and that television, as Karina mentioned, is only meaningful as the person who participates in it. Furthermore, asks this really interesting questions about streaming services, and what kind of television shows do you think we'll be watching in the next 5 years? Since there's this kind of reciprocal relationship or recursive relationship between culture and mediation, right, and television in this case, right, that as Karina mentioned, sort of dystopian themes, while the nuclear family was really, with the Brady Bunch and with the Cosby Show and things like that, with the nuclear family being, a once sort of cultural norm, if you will, or cultural ideal at least, um, at one time. And nowadays we see very different kinds of families. We see thematic kind of focus on dystopian themes, as Karina mentioned, but also upon minority communities. Um, um, and we see television also taking on more political themes, and I think that's exactly right. We live in a kind of highly politicized age, with the Black Lives Matter movement, with the Me Too movement, with all the political upheaval, and the sort of spectacularization of electoral politics in our society and political figures. We certainly live in that political time and those things. I mean, I think of something like The Handmaid's Tale as a television show that's really sort of novel and new. It's obviously a story written, decades and decades ago. The Handmaid's Tale by Margaret Atwood, and has a very feminist standpoint. In fact, I think it was written in the 60s. That's a guess. I don't know exactly what year. But my guess is written sort of when the cultural milieu, if you will, was the sort of radical feminism and feminist politics. And so now we still see that feminism coming to bear with something like the Me Too movement. And we can see how the Me Too movement, we can see a correspondence between that and The Handmaid's Tale, for sure. So what shows do we think will be on in the next 5 years? I have no idea. I mean, I think we're going to see the next 5 years. 5 years is not that far away, and so I feel like we'll still kind of be on this highly politicized television content. One thing that I do know in terms of is that we need to remember that this is up to us, right? We are going to create the kind of television that ideally we are going to create the kind of culture. We're responsible for that. Ideally, we can be responsible for that. If we can continue to sort of raise awareness about the things that we think are important. What can streaming platforms do to connect people more fully to one another was another really interesting question that Karina posed. And what instantly jumped into mind was the idea of Netflix parties. I don't, I mean, of course, you have the old Netflix and chill thing. Forgive me there. But Netflix parties, which I never did it. I think it was a kind of application that Netflix started where you could watch a television show or stream a television show or stream content simultaneously and actually communicate in live, like sort of watching TV over Zoom. I never did it. I think Netflix sort of piloted this kind of application or whatever you want to call it, a sort of addition to their streaming service. But so that was one thing that jumped in my mind. But the other thing that sort of jumped into my mind here was that, and this goes back to the question of pace and speed and Derek's post discussion starter, which is that a lot of this stuff is being driven, a lot of our our technological development is being driven and dominated by consumerist culture and major corporations. And I mentioned this in my last discussion. And that's where I think, it's not just a matter of the pace, it's also the matter of the direction, right? So Banal mentions, like, I think really astutely, that Netflix is going backwards, that they're being way too focused on monetary value instead of creativity and loyalty to viewers, right? So if we have, a few, mega corporations that are really interested in the bottom line when it comes to the end of the day, that's the number one thing is profit. That's where development gets concerning for me. So that way, it's not like iPhone is coming out with a new version because it's necessary, or because it advances phone technology that much more. um, Really, all these iPhones is about making money. We seem to follow right in line, and I'm including myself in that, when the new phone comes out and we wait in line for that new phone, even though we just bought one a year before. And so, in many ways, the logic with which technology is being developed is very much, and I think it's very concerning, and this is where that dehumanization comes into play, is really guided by consumerism and capitalism. Um, Zakia mentioned that she hoped that we'd be working towards more authentic storylines. And I mentioned The Handmaid's Tale, obviously a sci-fi show, a speculative show, a dystopian show, as Karina mentioned, but something that really sort of addresses, through the kind of metaphors of that sci-fi thing, the kind of a more authentic notion of female experience and female oppression and discrimination. um, and Zakia mentioned, increasing focus upon different minority groups such as Asian Americans or Muslim Americans in our television shows, and those being ways that we can really start to perhaps connect more fully with one another, particularly since we see ourselves being so divided in our current society. So really some great conversation here, and one last takeaway. I was going to go through a number of sort of what I thought were the key points from the reading, but again, I don't want to take up too much of your time here. But there's one thing that I think kind of puts a nice bow, if you will, on top of all these points, and it really comes with the first two readings, right? I already mentioned Ursula K. Le Guin saying that she that technology is the human interface with the material world, right? And she says, like, we tend to think of technology as being, you know how does she say it? We think nothing less complex and showy than a computer or a jet bomber deserves to be called technology, right? But we forget such things as paper, ink, wheels, knives, clocks, chairs, aspirin pills. Those are all different technologies that we tend to sort of forget. But the thing I really want to drive at here in terms of Le Guin, and this also with Raymond Williams with the keywords reading, is that she says, Ursula K. Le Guin says, I don't know how to build and power a refrigerator or program a computer, but I don't know uh, and I don't know how to make a fish hook or a pair of shoes either, but I could learn. We all can learn. That's the neat thing about technologies. They're what we can learn to do. So this perhaps is a little bit too on the nose here for a class about technologies, but I think it's exactly to the point, which is to say that how is it that technologies are about learning, and a logic of learning? Now, hold on. So the word, and this is what Raymond Williams talks about, the word technology, literally, if we break it down to its roots, and I'm looking down at the text here, etymologically, right, is from technologia. I'm sure I'm mispronouncing that, from Greek, and technologia from modern Latin, which meaning is systematic treatment, which is kind of interesting. But back to connecting to the Le Guin, I thought it was a techne. So we think about something like anthropology, right? The study of humans, right? So it's the study of, but techne, that stem means an art or a craft. So the study of the craft, the study of art, technology, or I was thinking the study of learning, how learning happens. That the word technology could be seen as one that is referencing the ways in which, not these fancy machines that we all think of when we think of technology, but technology is about how learning happens and how meaning, therefore, in many cases, happens. So that was just kind of, um, sparking in my mind when I went through these readings and through all of our conversations. Again, welcome to week 2. I look forward to the gesturants and getting into some weird stuff with that. Like I said, don't overburden yourself with these readings. There's no reading quizzes or anything like that. Just explore what you want and what really catches your eye. And I hope you have some fun with that. So far, it's been a wonderful opening week, and I look forward to the weeks to come, and I'll be in touch soon. All right, everybody, take care, and I'll see you online.